area during the last war. Whereas the Hurricane, contrasting with the one on the Hurricane line, is the very last of all the Hurricanes produced. Unit 865 coming off the line in July 1944. Slow to be the cockpit, the last of the village. Duke, then Hawker's chief test pilot, a new absolute world airspeed record, EA11, itself a derivative of the F4, basic F4. The Royal Navy using the Hunters, civilian operated in fact by the Fleet Requirements and Air Direction Unit. Let's look to the runway and the Seahawk. This afternoon is Lieutenant Bob Yap. So the Seahawk in the Hawker story is that its origin lies in Hawker's first jet aircraft, the P-1040, which in many ways is very similar to... Well, that was in December of 1944. It wasn't until the January of 1946 that officialdom was to be convinced a naval interceptor. First flight of it, the Seahawk differed from the original P-1040 prototype by virtue of folding wings, catapult spools, an acorn fairing at the fin and tailplane junction, the replacement of the square exhaust by the so-called pen nib fairings, and a built-in gun armament of 4 20mm Hispano cannon, and the provision for drop tanks beneath against airfields in Egypt, in the absence of the Royal Air Force being able to do so with their fighters from Cyprus out of the range. And indeed it said they didn't receive the clearance either to deliver anything but gunfire. So quite a link with Hawker's history. And a considerable career too with the Royal Navy is that of the Seahawk. Although let it not be overlooked too that it sold to the Federal German Navy, the Royal Netherlands Naval Air Service, the Royal Australian Navy and the Indian Navy, also taking ex-Royal Navy examples as well. Well, all this is part of celebrating the 50th anniversary of the most famous of all Hawker aeroplanes, and certainly in the context of so many of the nations of the free world, one of the most famous of all aeroplanes in the world. That's the reason why it is the Spitfire and the Hurricane that equipped the Royal Air Force Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, as we shall see later on in the programme. But it is to the Royal Air Force that we owe our thanks for allowing us to have both of the flight's Hurricanes this weekend, to allow us to mount this Hawker celebration, and at the same time to allow you to see the Battle of Britain Memorial flight at its full display strength. It is then to one of those examples of the two aircraft that we now turn in the hands of Flight Lieutenant Tim Nolan. This machine in the night fighter colour scheme, worn around the November 1940 period by 85 Squadron when they flew the Hawker Hurricane. Designed as a single-seat fighter and fighter bomber, constructed of metal tube rear fuselage covered with fabric, here with metal skinned wings, but in fact the very earliest Hurricanes also had fabric-covered main planes. It thus marks the transition between Hawker's very famous biplane families, something of which we shall see in a moment, and on to its monoplane line. After the Hurricane, however, came stress skin construction with such as the Typhoon and the Tempest, on to the Fury and the Sea Fury, and on with the jetline as we've now seen. Here, however, beneath that Hurricane outline lies the basic fabric-covered metal tube fuselage built on the patent principles introduced with the Hawker Heron of 1924 and pursued on through the Hart and Fury families through the 30s. Hawkers chose this, being a familiar method of construction to them, for essentially two reasons. One, that they feared that switching to the more complicated stress skin method would delay the aircraft's introduction into service, and two, that it might be easier to maintain in the field, and an aircraft too capable of withstanding a greater degree of battle damage. Well, in fact, they were to be proved right, with 40 aircraft being completed in just the first 3 months of production, the first Hurricane Squadron being Treble One, forming at Norfolk in December 1937. Whereas the Hawker Fury, the classic single-seat fighter biplane, had been the RAF's first fighter capable of over 200 miles an hour, so with the Hurricane, they now had the first to exceed 300. Indeed, let it not be overlooked that originally the Hurricane was to be known as the Fury monoplane. Now, though, the Hurricane marked the demise of the twin-gun biplane. Its armament consisted of 8 .303-inch machine guns mounted in the wings. The Hawkers were right with their production philosophy was shown when, by the outbreak of war, 497 Hurricanes have been delivered to the RAF, equipping 18 squadrons. The stress skin Spitfire equipped only 9 squadrons. The first Hurricanes into action were those of the Advanced Air Striking Force and the Air Component Force squadrons, going to bases across the Channel to take part in the Battle of France. And in fact, the first Hurricane victory was the first German aircraft to be shot down in France, Dornier 17, brought down by No. 1 Squadron in August of 1939. Then Hurricanes joined Gladiators in the Norwegian campaign of May and June 1940. But it was, of course, on into the Battle of Britain that the Hurricane was to contribute so much. fact, the RAF began the battle with 26 squadrons of Hurricanes compared to 20 of Spitfires. And it meant that by well, as the Hunter clears, we go back through that history again and we turn to the last airworthy example of the family from which the Hurricane was directly derived. Dickie Martin flies this, the Shuttleworth Collection's Hawker Hind. This, a two-seat light day bomber, flying here in the colours in which it appeared in public for the first time at Airfate 84, in the markings of number 15 Squadron of the Royal Air Force. Indeed, if one were to remove that upper wing from the Hind and the accompanying struts and wires, you would see a shape very similar to the one that you've just seen in the Hurricane. It all stems from a request in May 1926 from the Air Ministry for a day bomber entering service in 1930, having a top speed of 160 miles an hour. That seemed impossible at that stage. After all, the then current RAF fighter, the Gamecock, could only a year after the prototype first flew from Brooklands at Weybridge in Surrey. A quick message, if I may, for Sergeant Michael Basham. He's asked to phone urgently Lake and Heath extension 2118 or 3119. Sergeant Michael Basham urgently pleads, Staff Sergeant Michael Basham, phone urgently RAF Lake and Heath 2118 or 3119. Well, we hope that we can add the Tomtit to the programme for the moment, but to the company that preceded the Hawker One, all of course built on the fortunes of the Sopwith company, founded by Sir Thomas Sopwith, who we're delighted to say is still very much alive, and here one of his company's most famous products from the First World War, the Sopwith Triplane. This particular machine, a replica in fact, built to the original plans, owned by Patrick Lindsay and being flown here by Peter Waller. Well, that was a development of a long line of Sopwith aircraft, and this is one of the stages in it. Essentially taking the basic design of the Sopwith pup. Don't you also notice that the centre plane is mounted at pilot's eye level, again to minimise the effect on his view. As with so very many aircraft during the First World War, very brief career, such was the pace of development, but most certainly the triplane had one of the most significant ones. It was in action for just 7 months, supplanted in November 1917 by the Sopwith Camel. The Royal Naval Air Service took the majority of them, just some 140 aircraft, exchanging in fact a number of SPADs with the Royal Flying Corps in order to get these aircraft. Numbers 1 and 8 naval squadrons in February of 1917, and then with number 10 naval squadron in May of that year. And it's Naval 8 in particular, the flight led by Flight Sub-Lieutenant Raymond Collishaw, B Flight, the so-called Black Flight. All the Sopwith triplanes of B Flight were given names beginning with black, like Black Death, Black Maria, Black Prince, Black armament, just one single fixed synchronised Vickers gun on the upper forward fuselage. A number had twin synchronised. To serve with the Royal Air Force on into the 1920s. By then, the Sopwith Company, in common with so many, with the armistice, faced a very different change in their fortunes. No longer did the military need to operate so many aircraft, It had as many as it needed. It didn't need any new ones. There was no civil market. And like so many companies, it went on to become part of Hawker Siddeley, part in turn now of British Aerospace. And it is, of course, from the road in this case, taking us back to 1916, an aircraft that itself achieved a remarkable reputation in spite of its low firepower and low engine power, and particularly in the naval context, is forever remembered as being responsible in August of 1917 for being the first aircraft ever to land on a ship underway, and so do much to give birth to naval aviation.
It goes rolling.
Now it's the Falcons taking the stage.
Right, what's that?
Don't move it.
He went to the
Haig-Thomas, flying another of the Shuttleworth collection aircraft. We come to the oldest Hawker design in the programme. Gave a little bit of an engine problem, and so it's come a little out of sequence, but welcome nonetheless. Unique. This is the only example of the Hawker Tomtit surviving in the world. There were only some 40 Tomtits built because, for a change, this was not one of the most successful Hawker designs. It was produced in response to a request from the Air Ministry in 1926 for a new trainer to replace the then seemingly permanent and ubiquitous Avro 504 trainer that had, of course, been derived from a prototype that had first flown all the way back in 1913, and while first used operationally, went on to its greatest fame as a training aeroplane, perhaps the most famous trainer in the world. However, that was an aircraft built entirely of wood. By 1926, industry generally was turning to the RAF taking something like 385 out of the 480 or so examples in total that were built. It being the RAF's standard basic trainer on through until 1939, until ousted by the Manchester and the Tiger Moth. Nonetheless, while it was a successful aircraft within itself, and indeed could have made quite an impact on the private and sporting scene, the problem was that Hawkers were very, very much preoccupied then with the hind construction, and so they were, in a way, not so anxious to push the production of this aircraft and the wider sales, while they could instead concentrate on the hind and heart families.
That's the one they couldn't get up to start with. They've been trying for about an hour.
Well, now, as we complete the Hawker sequence, we turn to an aircraft from the United States Air Force again. The initials are nearly similar, that's what. Mr. Norman Hudson of Colchester is urgently required at the First Aid Centre. That is found at the back of the main static park area, the back of the main ramp, up alongside the MAC terminal. That's for the... That's the Catalina clearing. It means the stage is now clear for another go, the Spitfire. The Hurricane, and in turn, the Lancaster. Well, the Hurricane and Spitfire, of course, from the Royal Air Force's Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, which also operates the Lancaster. Their contribution to the programme, however, takes on a new twist this year. We present for the first time a fighter variant of the Tornado. We have an example in the Static Park this weekend, and we have examples of the Mark that's currently in squadron service with this. We celebrate this year the Hawker Hurricane. This the very last of all the Hurricanes produced. Rolled out from Langley in Buckinghamshire, now with aircraft production by Hawkers. Using the aircraft for test and communication purposes. Well, even though the aircraft didn't serve with the RAF, they're shooting that aircraft down. Particular irony at the time is that the Hurricane was unarmed. Certainly, though, during her of the something.
Over to that. This is Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, indeed the only full-time member of the flight. All the other pilots and engineers working as a secondary duty in the flight's continued maintenance and operation. The classic heavy bomber, a crew of 7, and indeed a significant part of Mildenhall's wartime equipment. I mentioned that in the context of 15 Squadron earlier, and much earlier on in the day I talked of the particular link food to the starving Dutch people. Weapons bay held such things as powdered milk, powdered egg, chocolate, the 10-ton bomb, 22,000 pounds. 33 Lancaster 1s were converted to carry that bomb. Aircraft that emptied. Later targets were to be the bridges and viaducts at Arnsberg, Aarbergen and Nienburg. Day approached, the last operations flown by the Lancaster, the last low from the left. flies the Spitfire. This the 2A, one of two Merlin engine Spitfires that the flight had, the other the 5B. These markings flown by squadron leader Finley. Comes from the first unit in the RAF to receive the type. Number 229 Operational Conversion Unit from Royal Air Force Coningsby, where to is based the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. Spitfire from the left, Tornado from the right. Tornado GR1 introduced the concept of variable geometry, the so-called swing wing, into the Royal Air Force for the first time. He did so in the low-level all-weather day or night strike roll. Here we see it now, though, for the fighter roll. The ability to rapidly decelerate like that, with the wings in the intermediate position, with the wings fully forward, to land slowly and use relatively short airfields, and of course with the wing fully swept back. That for maximum speed. Comes from two Rolls-Royce. And that, as you can see, not only is to add more internal fuel to the aircraft so as to enhance its range and loiter capability, but it improves the aircraft's fineness ratio and so its acceleration. Well used, to good effect there by Rick Peacock Edwards and Andy Lister Tomlinson as they depart, leaving Paul Day to depart low beneath, back to Coningsby. 160.